The sound cut through the ceremony like an axe blow. The church doors burst open, and a dark, sweat-drenched horse galloped to the threshold of the temple. Its rider could barely stay in the saddle from the exertion. The ceremony was nearly finished. The priest had already spoken half of the vows. Caleb stood before Chloe, dressed in mourning black, with a ring in the priest's open palm. "Chloe!" The rider shouted from his horse, shattering the stony silence of the temple. "Don't marry him. Not yet. Listen to me first, I beg you." It was Tobias. The priest was left speechless. The guards immediately headed toward the doors with hands already on their swords, but he did not dismount. She stood there on the threshold with a heaving chest, her gaze fixed only on him, ignoring the guards, ignoring the king, ignoring the entire court that had begun to rise from the pews with muffled gasps. Chloe stood paralyzed with her hand, still halfway toward Caleb's. She felt the eyes of the whole court on her back, the weight of the silver dress adorned with pearls and diamonds like armor that could no longer hold her up. The scent of roses and incense was suffocating her, and, above all, she felt Caleb's gaze fixed upon her, waiting in silence for her to decide. No one stopped. Not a voice, not even her father's, rose to beg her to stay. And in that silence, with Tobias pleading from the threshold and Caleb motionless before the altar, offering not a word, not a defense, not a single gesture that would contradict what she thought she knew of his disdain, Chloe made the most impulsive and terrifying decision of her life. She gathered the skirt of her dress with both hands and ran. She ran down the central aisle of the church, between the pews filled with gaping nobles with the silver embroidery tearing against her own heels, without looking back once, for she feared that if she looked back, if she saw Caleb's face, she would never find the courage to cross those doors. Tobias reached out his hand from the horse, and she took it, and he pulled her up into the saddle in front of him with the same desperate strength a man uses to rescue another from drowning. "Hold on," he whispered in her ear, and spurred the horse before the guards could block their path. They thundered out of the church at a gallop, with the wedding dress waving like a broken flag behind them. And in the final instant, before the gates were left behind, Chloe caught a glimpse of Caleb's face, not furious, not even surprised, just devastated, with an expression she could not fully read at the time. She would not see him again for 6 years. She did not know, as the horse galloped away from everything she had known, that the man she left standing at the altar would carry a wound twin to her own all that time, born of the same lie neither of them had authored. And she did not know that 6 years later, it would be she who returned to cross those same gates, not fleeing this time, but begging. Lauren's skin had been worsening for weeks without relief, and the village physician had nothing left to offer but compassion and a bill Chloe could not pay. "The ointment I've been giving her is no longer enough," the man had told her, avoiding her eyes as if poverty were a contagious disease. "She needs something stronger prepared by an apothecary in the capital, something expensive that will have to be bought repeatedly, not just this once." Chloe had nodded, paid with the last coins she had left, and returned to the cabin where her 5-year-old daughter scratched her arms and neck in her sleep, where her skin had cracked into red patches that bled a little every time the rough blanket rubbed against them. She had sat down by the bed. She had moved her little hands away from the injured skin, careful not to wake her fully, and had done what she had been doing since Tobias never returned from the northern campaign, calculating how much remained, how much was missing, how much time before there was nothing at all left for the next jar of ointment. The numbers never proved her right. They hadn't for 2 years. She had sold her mother's ring in the autumn. She had sold her childhood books in the winter. She had finally sold the shame that kept her away from Rivenhall. Because a mother could survive the humiliation of begging, but she could not survive burying her own daughter for not having tried. So now she walked toward the castle where 6 years prior she had done the unthinkable before the entire assembled court. "Name," the guard at the gate said without really looking at her. "Chloe of Ashgrove," she replied, and she hated how her voice trembled as she said it. The guard snapped his head up, and something crossed his face that Chloe knew well, the uncomfortable recognition of someone recalling an old scandal. The same Chloe of Ashgrove who started the sentence and didn't finish it, as if saying her name aloud were poor manners. "The same," Chloe said, with her chin held high, even though inside she felt smaller than ever. "Tell His Majesty that I will ask for anything, that I don't come out of pride, that I bring my sick daughter and nothing more." The guard hesitated. And perhaps it was the morning chill, or the red cracked patches peeking out from the girl's neck visible even under the hood, or simply that he had spent too many years serving a king who, despite his reputation as a distant man, had never left a sick child waiting at the threshold. He turned around and went inside. Chloe stayed there with a restless Lorraine, scratching relentlessly at her neck, and she prayed, without knowing exactly to whom, hoping that the man she had humiliated 6 years ago would receive her anyway. The throne room was nothing like the one she remembered. 6 years ago it had been a place of banquets, golden laughter, and music. Now the curtains were drawn against the morning light, and Caleb sat in a work chair not on the throne, surrounded by documents that a secretary read to him in a low voice. He had changed. Chloe noticed it immediately, though she couldn't say exactly how. He still had the same firm jaw, the same bearing of a man who wore a crown like someone carrying a weight he didn't choose. But there was something new in the way he kept his head slightly tilted, as if he listened more than he looked. "My lord," the secretary said, "Lady Chloe of Ashgrove requests an audience." The silence that followed was so long that Chloe thought they would throw her out without even letting her speak. Caleb remained completely still, and she saw, with a clarity that pained her, how his hand slowly closed over the arm of the chair. "For what reason?" he asked at last, and his voice sounded exactly as she remembered, grave, contained, without a single crack through which to guess what he was thinking. "For the reason of begging, Your Majesty," she answered herself, taking a step forward before fear could stop her. "I do not come to claim anything, or ask you to forget what I did. I come only to ask." Something crossed Caleb's face. It wasn't surprise then. It was something older, more tired. The kind of expression a man reserves for a wound he thought was closed that someone has just grazed without permission. "Leave us," he told the secretary, without taking his eyes off the exact spot where Chloe stood, though she would have sworn, had she dared to look closely, that his gaze wasn't quite focused on her. When they were left alone, the silence stretched on so long that Lorraine, half asleep against her mother's shoulder, stirred and let out a small whimper. Caleb's eyes settled on the girl. Something in his expression softened just a moment before hardening once more. "Is she yours?" he asked. "Yes, Your Majesty. Her name is Lorraine. Her skin has been ailing for months. A rash that won't go away and worsens every winter. The physician in my village says she needs an ointment I can no longer afford, neither this time nor for the ones to come." Chloe took a deep breath. She had rehearsed those words the entire journey, yet they still scraped as they left her throat. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything after what I did, but I swear I wouldn't let my daughter bleed at night out of pride, neither mine nor anyone else's." Caleb looked at her for a long time. Chloe could not read what lay behind those eyes, but she noticed, without knowing why, that he seemed to study her voice more than her face, as if it were difficult for him to fix his gaze exactly where she was. "Have the court physician summoned," he said, at last toward the door. A servant hurried to obey. "The girl will be attended to." He paused and something bitter tinged his voice. "As for the rest, do not expect this to change what happened between us." "I do not," said Chloe, and inside she felt something break a little more, because Caleb's gaze lacked the contempt she had imagined for 6 years. It held something worse. Weariness. The weariness of a man who had stopped expecting answers a long time ago. That night, while Lorraine finally slept as the physician applied a first ointment to her wounded skin, Chloe could not sleep. She stood at the window of the small room they had assigned her, watching the same courtyard where, 6 years ago, a horse had galloped her, away from everything she knew. The memory did not need to be fully summoned. Closing her eyes was enough to feel the weight of the silver dress again, the silence of the entire court holding its breath, and, above all, Caleb's face in that final moment before the temple doors closed between them. No fury, no surprise, just that devastated expression she had preferred not to name for 6 years, because naming it would have meant admitting that perhaps she hadn't fled a man who didn't love her, but a man who never had the chance to tell her he did. She had never received an answer to the letter she sent 3 days before the wedding, but no messenger, no word neither of acceptance nor of rejection. And in that silence she had read the worst, that Caleb knew her divided heart and didn't care at all, that he only wanted the Ashgrove name joined to his own. That was why, when Tobias arrived on horseback that day, she hadn't thought of it as a betrayal, but as the only sincere gesture anyone offered her during the entire ceremony. She didn't know then, she wouldn't know until weeks after returning to Riven, that Caleb had carried for those same 6 years a twin wound, made of the same lie that neither of them had written. Chloe turned from the window that night, with the memory still burning in her chest, and wondered, for the first time, what would have happened if someone, anyone, had said a single word differently that day. The court physician was an old man with steady hands, and by sunset the next day he had already soothed Lauren's skin with an ointment of herbs and oils that Chloe could never have afforded on her own. He had patiently explained that the rash wouldn't disappear overnight, that it would need constant treatment applied twice a day for weeks, perhaps months, for the skin to heal completely and not crack again in the cold. The girl was finally sleeping without scratching, her breathing calm, and Chloe allowed herself for the first time in days to cry without anyone seeing her. She didn't expect to be allowed to stay more than 1 night. But on the 3rd day, when she went down to the outer halls looking for something to do with her hands, cleaning, sewing, anything other than waiting, she found the king, sitting alone in his office with a pile of letters before him, and the tense face of a man who would rather be anywhere else. "Read that one to me," he said without looking up, assuming she was just any servant. "The one with the green seal." Chloe stopped in the doorway. There was something strange in the request, in the way he didn't look at her, in the way his fingers brushed the edge of the table before finding the right letter, like someone who knows a path by memory, because they don't trust they can see it. "Your Majesty," she said, and he jerked his head up. "You," he said, and something akin to shame crossed his face before he masked it with coldness. "I thought you were one of the pages." "I can read it to you if you wish," Chloe offered carefully, not quite knowing why she dared to stay in that room a second longer than necessary. Caleb hesitated for a long time. Then, with a nearly brusque gesture, like someone surrendering to a need they hate to admit, he held out the letter. Chloe read it aloud. "A harvest report from the southern province, complaints from a minor noble about taxes. Nothing important. But she noticed while she read that Caleb listened with excessive concentration, like someone memorizing every word, because they know they won't be able to consult them again for themselves. "Thank you," he said when she finished, and his voice sounded more tired than before. "You may go, Chloe," but she didn't leave. "Your Majesty, if you would allow me to stay a few more days while my daughter recovers fully, I would gladly help you with whatever you need. Not to repay anything, just because I don't know how to sit still when there is work to be done." Caleb watched her for a long moment, with that gaze that seemed to hear more than it saw. "Very well," he said at last. "But don't expect this to change what I think about what happened between us." "I don't expect it," Chloe lied, because a small, stubborn part of her expected it anyway. The days turned into a routine, without either of them entirely planning it. Chloe started by reading the letters that Caleb pretended to review himself. Then she began to accompany him, without anyone exactly asking her to the small audiences where minor nobles presented their complaints, sitting in a discreet corner, whispering to him when no one was looking, who was approaching from the other end of the hall so he would know who to greet before the distance gave him away. "The man in the blue doublet is the grain intendant," she whispered one afternoon, while the figure was still crossing half the hall. "His name is Perrin. He has a slight limp in his left leg." Caleb nodded almost without looking at her, and when Perrin arrived before him, he greeted him by name with such naturalness that no one in the room noticed anything strange. Only Chloe saw the small relief that crossed his shoulders. Afterward, as the weeks passed, she began to notice the patterns more clearly than she had dared to admit at first. How Caleb never read anything in front of the advisors, and instead demanded, with an authority that left no room for questions, that everything be read aloud as if it were a royal habit and not a necessity. How did he hesitate? Barely for an instant, before recognizing someone approaching from the other end of the garden, squinting discreetly until the figure drew near enough. Like at formal dinners, he always asked for the dishes to be described before touching them, disguising it as culinary curiosity. One afternoon, while playing a game of chess that Caleb insisted on playing from memory to pass the time, Chloe saw him move a piece to an empty square twice in a row, until she, careful not to make it obvious, slid her own hand and corrected the board's position, as if by accident. "Thank you," he said, in a voice so low she almost didn't hear it. And for the first time, he didn't sound like a king. He sounded like a man tired of pretending. She said nothing about what she had noticed. Instinctively, she understood that saying it would be like tearing away something he protected more fiercely than his own crown, something he had chosen to carry alone, in silence, for years, just as she had carried her own shame alone. "How do you do it?" he asked her one afternoon, while she was describing, unprompted, the seals on 2 letters that had arrived mixed up. No one else bothers to notice those details, not even my own secretary who has been in my service for 10 years. "I grew up observing," Chloe said simply. "When you are the disappointing daughter, you learn to read a room before the room reads you. You learn to notice who enters, who leaves, who smiles too much and who stays too silent." Something softened on Caleb's face. It was barely an instant, but she saw it. "You disappointed no one," he said with a different voice, slower, "except, perhaps, me. And I'm not even sure about that anymore." After these weeks, Chloe felt her heart stop. What does he mean? But Caleb had already closed off his expression, like someone shutting a door that had been opened without permission. Nothing. Forget I said that. She did not forget it. And that night, while Laurent finally slept without scratching in the bed they had given him, his skin soothed by the court ointment, Chloe stayed awake wondering what exactly Caleb thought he knew about her and why that certainty seemed to hurt him as much as the memory of the horse at the church door hurt her. There was a moment, around the third week, when Chloe was sure that everything would fall apart. An ambassador from a neighboring kingdom was visiting the court, and Caleb had to receive him in the great hall, surrounded by all the pomp that such a meeting demanded. Chloe, who had already become accustomed to sitting nearby discreetly, noticed the problem before it happened. The ambassador wore a ceremonial mask from his own country, covering much of his face, and approached from the darkest end of the hall where the torches barely reached. Caleb, who relied on light and distance to disguise what he could no longer fully see, stood up with an expression that only Chloe, among the entire court, knew how to recognize as contained panic. She did not think twice. She rose from her corner, crossed the hall with a calm step, as if she were taking flowers somewhere else, and stopped by the throne, whispering before the ambassador reached greeting distance. Golden mask, gray cloak with blue trim. He is the third from the left in his entourage, the tallest one. His name is Lord B.H. Caleb nodded barely, and when the ambassador arrived, he greeted him with a perfectly calculated warmth, naming him even before the man could introduce himself, leaving the entire entourage visibly impressed by the king's memory. Later, alone, Caleb stared at the spot where she sat with an expression that Chloe could not quite decipher. "You could have let me look like a fool in front of an entire neighboring kingdom," he said. "It would have been a much smaller humiliation than the one I caused you years ago, reading aloud what I thought you were." Chloe felt her chest tighten. "I did nothing out of revenge, Your Majesty. I did it because I cannot stand to see anyone drown when I can lend them a hand." Caleb looked at her then in a different way, longer, slower, as if he were trying to memorize something he knew he wouldn't be able to see clearly again if he waited too long. "I am starting to think," he said, almost to himself, "that I was wrong about many more things than I was willing to admit." Corinne arrived at court nearly a month after Chloe, with the bearing of a woman who had risen far since the two had last seen each other. Chloe recognized her immediately. The lady-in-waiting, who had been like a sister during their youth at Ashgrove, now married to Lord Rowan, a close ally of Christians, and sporting a brooch on her chest given only to those with the absolute trust of the royal council. "Chloe," Corinne said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "what a surprise to find you here. I thought you'd rather starve than ever set foot in this castle again after what you did." "I chose my daughter over my pride," Chloe replied calmly, though something in Corinne's tone made her skin crawl in a way she couldn't name. "How noble of you." Corinne looked around with the lightness of someone seeking an audience. "Though I wonder what His Majesty thinks whenever he sees you nearby, remembering exactly the day you fled from him in front of his entire kingdom." Chloe felt the blow, but she did not look away. "His Majesty and I have talked about that more than you imagine." Something flickered briefly behind Corinne's eyes, a shadow of alarm that vanished so quickly Chloe almost doubted she had seen it. "How interesting," Corinne said and walked away without another word. But Chloe was left with a cold feeling in her stomach, the same one she had felt that day in the church when no one raised their voice to stop her. That night, unable to sleep, she went down to the royal library, looking for any distraction that would keep her from thinking about Corinne's gaze. It was there, among the council records from 6 years ago, that she accidentally found a drawer of archived correspondence that no one had bothered to check since. And among those papers, folded and yellowed, she found a clean copy written in Corinne's own hand with instructions for the royal messenger to deliver only this version and destroy the attached original. Chloe stood motionless, with the paper trembling in her fingers, as she read the words she recognized as her own, twisted, cut out of context, and stripped of all the humility with which she had written them. I confess that I already love another man. Everything else was missing. The plea for understanding was missing. The proposal to build something sincere was missing. Above all, the genuine love with which she had clumsily tried to be honest with a man she barely knew was missing. Corinne had cut everything off, and she had done it according to an attached note in Christian's handwriting to protect Corinne's engagement to Lord Rowan and ensure no scandal would tarnish the alliance with the Ashgrove family. Christian had known. Christian had allowed it, and with that something even more terrible was revealed to Chloe. Caleb had never responded with disdainful silence to her honest plea. He had responded, perhaps, with his own wounded silence to a mockery she had never even written. The two of them had spent 6 years hating false versions of each other built by the same hand. Chloe did not sleep that night. At dawn, with the paper held against her chest as if it might burn if she let it go, she went straight to Caleb's study. He was alone, as always at that hour, with the curtains half open so the gray morning light could enter without forcing him to strain his eyes. "Your Majesty," Chloe said, and something in her voice must have alerted him because he turned toward her immediately. "I need you to listen to something, and I need you to believe me, even if it is difficult." "Chloe," he began wearily, "the letter you received before our wedding, the one that made you think I despised you, was not mine." She held out the paper. "This is the one Corinne wrote to replace it. I have the order she gave for mine to be destroyed." Caleb took the paper, and for an instant Chloe saw something she had not seen before. The exact way he held the document too close to his face, squinting, trying, unsuccessfully, to make out the words. "Read it to me," he said at last, his voice breaking in a way she had never heard from him before. "Please." In that instant, Chloe understood everything she had been noticing for weeks without naming. She understood why he never read in front of her, why he asked for everything to be repeated aloud, why he hesitated before recognizing a distant face, even her own, when the light hit wrong. She said nothing about it. Not yet. She only read the false letter, slowly, and then, with her heart in her throat, she recited from memory, word for word, what she had written in the original 6 years ago. She remembered it all. She had gone over it so many nights, wondering what she had done wrong, that the words remained intact somewhere in her memory like a wound that never quite finished healing. "I confess to you, my lord, that my heart already belongs to another man. I don't know if this offends you, or if I deserve your understanding in saying it, but I would rather start this marriage with the truth than with a silence that would one day destroy us both. If you still wish for it, I would put all my effort into building something honest between us, even if it isn't what either of us dreamed of." Caleb closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something on his face had shattered. "I never replied," he said in a hoarse voice. "I received what I thought was your letter 3 days before the wedding, and I didn't know what to do with the humiliation of feeling mocked by a woman I didn't even know. So I didn't respond at all. I let the wedding go on, thinking that at least this way I would fulfill my duty, even if you didn't want me. And when that man arrived on horseback, and you ran to him without me saying a word to stop you, I thought it confirmed everything I already believed, that it wasn't even worth trying to ask you to stay." "I interpreted your silence exactly the opposite way," Chloe said, tears already falling uncontrollably. "I thought you had read my truth, and that you didn't care at all about how I felt, that you were going to marry me anyway, like someone signing a land contract. When Tobias appeared, I didn't do it for love, I only did it because I thought he was the only person in that temple who truly cared about my heart." Caleb stood up, crossed the study, and for the first time in 6 years, took her hands. Neither of them ever knew the truth about the other. He said only the lie that Corinne built between us. 6 years, Chloe. 6 years building every decision regarding this court, every deal with your father, every word I never said to you, all based on a lie that wasn't even yours. I have also carried that burden, she said. I never knew what had happened to the real letter. I only knew that mine had disappeared into silence. Don't ever believe again that you deserve this, Caleb said. Neither of the two versions did you justice. Only the true one. The confrontation with Corinne was brief, because she had no way to deny the order signed in her own handwriting. I only wanted to protect my commitment, she said, her voice cracking for the first time since Chloe had known her. If the council had found out that Chloe loved another man before marrying you, they would never have taken it as an honest confession. They would have seen it as a scandal capable of breaking the alliance. And my commitment to Lord Rowan depended on that alliance between Ashgrove and the Crown not breaking prematurely. So you decided to break Chloe instead, Caleb said, with a coldness Chloe had never heard him direct toward anyone else. And me in the process, and a whole kingdom that was one horse away from a war of honor. Corinne did not respond. She had no way to. The subsequent investigation also uncovered what Christian had been doing ever since, using the old dowry agreement between the families to sell, little by little, lands that legally belonged to Chloe since the failed engagement without her consent or knowledge, pocketing the profits while his daughter begged for an ointment to keep her own granddaughter from scratching her skin until she bled. Did you know I was ruined? Chloe asked her father when she finally confronted him with Caleb by her side and the documents on the table between them. Did you know I needed those lands and yet you sold them? Anyway? Ye. Christian had no better defense than silence, the same weapon he had used 6 years ago when he fell, while his daughter ran toward a horse at the door of a church. Corinne will lose her place in this court, Caleb announced before the gathered council. And the fraudulently sold lands will be returned to their rightful owner, along with compensation for the years they were denied to her. As for Christian of Ashgrove, his voice in this council ends today. Lauren's skin healed completely before spring ended without a single mark, left on her neck or arms, and with it came back her usual laughter running through the gardens of Rivenhall, as if she had never spent a single night, scratching until she bled. Caleb, for his part, learned slowly to stop hiding what he had been concealing for years. He hired an eye doctor who confirmed what he had already suspected. His sight would continue to deteriorate, slowly but surely a sequel to a war wound he had never treated in time for not wanting to appear weak before his own kingdom. You don't have to pretend in front of me, Chloe told him one afternoon while she patiently taught him to memorize the number of steps between his office and the council chamber so he wouldn't have to depend on his sight in the hallways he knew best. You never had to, not even in the beginning. It took me half a lifetime to understand that, Caleb admitted, taking her hand. With you I finally learned that there is no shame in asking for help. It only exists in letting pride kill the one you love, or in letting a misunderstood silence decide for you what was never actually true. They married that spring, not with the cold pomp of the first attempt, but with a small ceremony, where Lauren carried the flowers, and where Caleb, for the first time in years, allowed everyone to see him lean openly on someone's arm, to walk down an aisle he could no longer navigate, alone with confidence. No one arrived on horseback this time. No one had to. Months later, Chloe found Caleb in the garden, with Lauren asleep against his shoulder, describing in a low voice the colors of the flowers he could no longer fully distinguish himself, letting the girl narrate with laughter which was which. Did you know? Chloe said, sitting next to them, that in many ancient courts, marriages were arranged without the betrothed having even seen each other once. Entire families decided the fate of their children through a single letter, without the voice of the one getting married counting for anything at all. Perhaps that is why letters weighed so much. Back then, they were sometimes the only true thing someone had the right to say for themselves, before another hand decided to change them. Caleb smiled, with that new calm that had replaced the coldness of before. "Then how lucky we are," he said, "that in the end, after all, the right letter found its way, even if it took 6 years and a horse along the way." Chloe no longer calculates coins at night. She calculates instead the steps between the office and the garden, so that Caleb never has to walk alone through what he cannot fully see. She calculates the laughter of Lorraine, which is no longer counted in restless nights, but in entire afternoons of play. And she calculates, above all, how much time they both lost believing a lie that neither had written. Would you have run to those church doors knowing what you risked, had you believed, like Chloe, that the silence of the man at the altar meant he had never cared for you? Or would you have waited even for just a second longer for someone to tell the truth before deciding for yourself? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. If you like this story, give it a like, share it, and subscribe for the next one. See you soon with another story.